Hi, and welcome to the Stefan Livera podcast, a show about Bitcoin and Austrian economics. So today, episode 132. Have you used Lightning Network yet, and would you use it in Lightning Gaming? Today's episode is with Christian Moss, but first, a word for the sponsors of the show. So firstly, go and look into Kraken, one of the world's leading Bitcoin exchanges. Really impressive exchange. They are renowned for their focus on security. They provide a high-quality platform, lots of trading volume, low fees, no minimum or hidden fees. They offer 24/7 support. They offer best-in-class accounting, reconciliation, and reporting, and just recently they've got Kraken Pro mobile app. Kraken Pro delivers all the security and features you love about the Kraken exchange in a beautiful mobile-first design for advanced Bitcoin trading on the go. Don't forget, there's Kraken OTC Desk for those seeking a more private, personalized service for large block trades. There is also Kraken Margin, up to 5 times long and short, and Kraken Futures, up to 50 times leverage to benefit from price swings or hedge your price risk. Go and check them out, kraken.com. This episode also brought to you by Unchained Capital. Unchained Capital are a Bitcoin financial services company empowering customers with financial freedom and control. All their products are built on the foundation of multi-signature, and they've got a really cool approach with collaborative custody, giving users control over their private keys, and you also get a financial partner and financial services. So Unchained offer 2 of 3 multi-signature vaults, and you can secure your Bitcoin for the long term with this, and if you ever need to access liquidity without selling your Bitcoin, Unchained collateralized loans offer you a unique option. All Bitcoin is stored on-chain, dedicated multi-sig addresses, it's never rehypothecated, and you can share in the security by holding 1 of 3 keys. I'm really impressed with Unchained. They're offering excellent services, they've released valuable content, and they've got open source tools such as Caravan and Hermit. I think you'll enjoy partnering with them, so go and look them up at unchained-capital.com. Next, it's Bitcoin Outlet, just now rebranding to 21x.io. 21x delivers rare and extraordinary merchandise to warriors of Bitcoin. Outstanding design is not just blindly slapping your logo on any object available. At 21x, every product carried is a work of art with a thoughtful design, and in keeping with the ethos of Bitcoin, all products created are limited edition. Once the product sells out, that's all, folks. So 21x is a sister company to Canada's Bull Bitcoin. Both companies are Bitcoin maximalists through and through. They only support Bitcoin. So this core belief has led them to align with other unapologetically maximalist companies. So if you want to rock some merch from a designer with an actual moral compass and unwavering maximalist views, head to 21x.io and grab yourself some of the best damn Bitcoin apparel on the planet. Also look into givebitcoin.io, the easiest and safest way to get your friends and family into Bitcoin. Have you ever given Bitcoin to people before and then they've lost it? Sometimes they just don't know what they're receiving, and that's why there's a lot of value with Give Bitcoin, because you can time lock that Bitcoin for 1 to 5 years, and every month for the first year, Give Bitcoin delivers a lesson from a world-class curriculum with input from many well-known Bitcoiners such as Safedine, Matt Odell, Jan Pritzker, and others. I'm also an advisor, I have a small equity stake, and I'm also providing input into their curriculum as well. And you can also get Bitcoin as a present for birthdays, Christmas, graduation, weddings. Put it on your wish list at givebitcoin.io. I really think givebitcoin.io can have a positive impact on Bitcoin adoption and understanding, so I'm excited to have them as a sponsor. So my guest today is Christian Moss, or if you're on Twitter, you'll know him as Mandelduck. Now, Christian's done a lot of work in terms of writing Bitcoin apps and games in particular, and he's got a lot of cool ideas, and as he is recently co-founding this new company, Zebedee, I thought it would be good to get him on and get his thoughts around Lightning as applied to gaming. I think this is a very exciting opportunity over the next few years, so I'm really excited to see where that goes. So here is the interview. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Chris, so obviously had the chance to meet you earlier this year and a couple times actually in Tokyo back then, and also at some of the Bitcoin conferences, most recently the Lightning conference. Obviously, I know you, but take a couple minutes and just let the listeners know a bit about your background in Bitcoin and Bitcoin development.
Yeah, sure. I actually started in your neck of the woods. I was actually working in Sydney, Australia. I was working for like a kind of an app development company. Basically, they built apps for anybody who walked through the door and had like about 50 grand in cash and an idea. We build apps. So most of my apps, I did all sorts. I did games. I did like more. Basically, I would build apps for people who wanted to build the next Uber or something, right? It was all random stuff. And then one guy came in and said he wanted us to make like a Bitcoin app, and I had no idea what Bitcoin was. And my coworker who sat next to me he swiveled around in his chair with a grin on his face. He was like the secret libertarian Bitcoiner in the room. And I spoke to him and he said, okay, sit down, let me teach you. And that was kind of the first moment when I fell down the rabbit hole. Yeah, so I started to build an app for that guy. I think the app's still around, but that's got me interested. And then at the time, there were no Bitcoin wallets on the iPhone. So just as a hobby, I just built a wallet for the iPhone. There were wallets, but they'd been taken down by Apple. Apple had this back in like 2013, I think, that they just got rid of all apps on the iPhone. But my job was basically I would submit apps to the iTunes store. I do like one every other week for the client. So I kind of knew how to get apps into the App Store. So I just thought I could get one in. I got one in. And that was my first introduction to it. So I made a Bitcoin wallet. It wasn't a very good wallet, but it was like 2013.
Yeah, nice.
Early. Yeah. And then after that, I had to learn Swift for my job. So Swift was this new programming language that Apple brought out to replace their Objective-C. And I had to learn it. And they had this, some guy made a tutorial how to make a Flappy Bird. You remember that old game? Popular game. It's like he made it in Swift like overnight and made a tutorial. So I thought that was a fun way to learn. So I kind of made a game that was quite a little bit based on that. And I thought, hey, it'd be cool to put Bitcoin into this. And so that's I tried to put Bitcoin into it. Apple didn't let me put Bitcoin into it for purchasing things. So I just thought, okay, well, they have this law, like this rule that you're not allowed to kind of purchase things with like cryptocurrencies or Bitcoin in the App Store, but it had no rule against sending people Bitcoin. So I thought, okay, I just wanted to get Bitcoin in the app any way possible. So I just made this simple game that people could play, and as they played it, it would tip them Bitcoin. You'd just like throw like a few kind of like, about a penny at them or something as they were playing the game. It's like early days, but that was kind of my first introduction into it.
Yeah, and so how did that change over time, like Bitcoin in 2013 to Bitcoin now in 2019? There's been a lot of shifts and changes in the way the culture is and the way Bitcoin is viewed. What was your view of that change?
Yeah, quite a few changes. Yeah. So I suppose when I first got into Bitcoin, I was ignorant like everybody else. I was kind of hounded on like the like Bitcoin talk and stuff, because I was like kind of spamming the blockchain. I was sending I had this game that it wasn't popular in like the real world, but it was quite popular in Bitcoin world. So I'd just be sending out all these tiny dust transactions everywhere. And I didn't really notice it at the time, but apparently it caused a little bit of controversy. And but at the time I was like, I'm paying the fee. It's all good. That was kind of, I think at the moment I wasn't like philosophically aligned with Bitcoin at the time. It was more just, it was a cool technology and I wanted to do cool things with the technology. So as I built the game and I started to talk to the community, and I started to get an understanding about why it doesn't make sense, for example, to build a game like on chain, because I remember very early days of the whole block size debate. I was thinking that if my tiny app, I'm just one person making a tiny app, is like causing all these transactions, then say like it'll just take another 100 indie game developers to have a similar app, let alone an app that would become as popular, say, as Flappy Bird, to really cause an issue. So at the time, then this is like 2014 and 15, I was trying to find off-chain solutions then, which short term I just had to do stuff like batching. So I was trying to batch transactions, make it efficient. I also tried to do completely custodial off-chain transactions, but then I got a lot of stick from that side as well. And this was causing issues in the games, because the games were quite fun and the games were quite popular, but I could see very early on that it wasn't really sustainable. And it kind of stopped me from pushing the game or marketing the game, because I knew that if the game just became super popular, like for example, it was like shown on the BBC or something like that, that I knew that the game, the network wouldn't be able to handle it per se. Yeah, so at the time, I think I noticed that a lot of people at the time, my similar, I guess, contemporaries who were also building games had the same issue. And everybody at that time, they seemed to go over to other chains. I remember thinking at the time, well, this is very much just kicking the ball down the road, right? I kind of made a prediction. At the time, everybody, when I was there, they were going over to Ethereum at the time, which had just launched, and it was, going to solve all the problems. And everybody was saying, yeah, it's fine. But I remember thinking at the time, well, I bet you, give it 2 or 3 years, they'll be moving to something else. And now a lot of those same people are moving to EOS or Tron or making their own game. So I guess how it's evolved over time, I think we've really seen, in my opinion, when I first started in, it was all about trying to build on the base layer, at least for novices like myself. And now it seems that we're building, it seems like it's okay to make apps and games, but they need to be on like a second layer or an application layer. And that's how I feel that's where we are at the moment.
Right. And so it took some years of experimentation, and then people are sort of coming around to this idea that, well, we need ways to either do batching or to use off-chain protocols such as, obviously, Lightning Network. And that's where we're, going to talk a bit about today with what you guys are doing with Zebedee. And also, actually, one other thing before we get into that, you wrote a cool article on the Zebedee Medium page, which is called "Does Bitcoin in Gaming Make Sense?" So do you want to just tell us a little bit about that article and why'd you write it?
Yeah, I wrote it because personally, I'm not a big guy for hype. I kind of, I like to think I'm a bit of quite skeptical. And I always like to kind of question the fundamental assumptions, like, does it make sense? Should we be putting Bitcoin in gaming? I think there's a good argument that you really shouldn't. And I think that's fine. But I just wanted to explore that argument. Does Bitcoin in gaming make sense? So at the time I wrote the article, I wasn't 100% certain myself. It was more kind of an essay in a way, just to kind of explore for myself. But I just had this idea that I kind of have two concepts when it comes to gaming and Bitcoin. One is that I think games, and I go into this in the article, games traditionally were used for value transfer between people. It's obviously like, people play games for fun, but the earliest games were all kind of used mainly for gambling, but the games weren't specific for gambling. So people still played them for fun, and people played them without money. But all these games kind of had a gambling mode where, they could attach a value to it to be transferred peer to peer. And as I wrote the article, I did a bit of research, and this was kind of true. And most games had this. So most famously, cards, is the most famous example. But then, as I kind of looked how games evolved digitally, because we had digital games before we had digital payments. So the first digital games that we had, a lot of them tried to they still had the concept of money in them, and money was quite strong. So if you think of Mario, you're basically collecting coins, all games had this concept of collecting coins and earning coins. And I kind of felt that was kind of, it was embedded in the idea that people like to play games and they like to get some sort of value. But obviously they couldn't do that at the time because, there were no digital payments. And the only digital payments that came were, in-app purchases, credit cards. So then they tried to kind of, put payments and values back in the game, but it wasn't the same. It wasn't peer-to-peer. It's just this idea that, you could buy a loot box or something. And it didn't feel quite right. And now I was thinking, well, now that we have something like the Lightning Network and this peer-to-peer network for transferring value, maybe that it's continuing kind of one aspect of how games were used in the past. We can actually people can play a game and they can play it for fun. Probably most people will just play the game without money, but if they want to kind of make the game a bit more fun, they can, stream Bitcoin between themselves. And then it kind of reminds me when I was a kid at Christmas, we'd get a lot of candy and sweets as presents. And we always used to play Monopoly. And when we played Monopoly when it wasn't Christmas, we just played, with just the normal paper money. But at Christmas, we would use the sweets and candy we got as the money. And it just made the game so much fun. So it wasn't necessarily about earning money. It wasn't strict gambling, but the idea that you'd have, a little bit of value there to kind of make the game a bit more focused or give it a bit more incentive. So I think that, like, the lowest hanging fruit is just to get that back into gaming. Just this idea that people can play a game and not massive amounts, but maybe they can have a few bucks or something. And it just makes the game a bit more fun, right? There's
something to play for.
Shot has a bit more meaning. So that was a kind of one idea I got. Like, I think Bitcoin in gaming makes sense on an application layer. I'm still very much of the opinion the base layer is, we kind of want, sound money that's, censorship resistant. But I think from an application layer, it kind of does make sense.
Yeah. And so in the article, you talk a little bit about how gaming evolved a little bit. And so, for example, the internet chain evolved and it took it away from being a peer-to-peer aspect. Can you touch on what your thinking is there?
Well, it's just, not now, but, when games and the internet first came out, mainly on mobile, there's no way to send money peer-to-peer. That was just it, right? I'm sure game companies would have liked to have done that, perhaps. I'm not saying that in-app purchases wouldn't exist. I just think they couldn't do peer-to-peer, and if they tried to do it in a custodial way, it gets complicated because they need to have a license and the money transmitters, all these things. I think there were a few game companies who tried to do this. I think the Linden dollar in Second Life is a famous example. And a few people have gotten around it, but it's still a bit clunky. It's not like, like each game has their own coin. So it's, and these coins have to be traded on a kind of illegal exchange or something. Yeah. So it's kind of clunky. So they were my thoughts. I think people just generally forgot about the idea of, that games could even do that. When, if you go back to playing cards, like it's, you go back 100, 200 years, it's obvious, that's what you did with games. If you're an adult and you're down the pub, you sweeten the deal a bit. But as we have digital games, that's kind of disappeared and people just forgotten about it. And if you even just say the concept to people that did you know that you can play a game and you can stream payments? They don't even know what you're talking about, right? It's so that's kind of what I meant there. I also have another kind of I think it's interesting, but another angle about gaming and Bitcoin, which I think it's still something I'm exploring, but I kind of think that, like, for me, still the most important thing about Bitcoin is, basically I can be my own bank. I don't have to trust any third parties. But I also find myself living in a first world country. I don't really need to use Bitcoin day to day, but I want to use Bitcoin day to day, if you know what I mean. Yeah. When I go to the supermarket, I can't use it, so I'm frustrated. I want to use it, but I can't. And I kind of think gaming, it could kind of be like martial arts or something, right? People study martial arts because I guess they want to feel like they can defend themselves in a fight, but they don't get into fights every day. So they kind of do sparring. I think gaming, in a way, it helps the ecosystem. It's like we're sparring with Bitcoin. So we can develop these tools, we can use Bitcoin for casual things, and then say that we really need Bitcoin one day. We've got that skill because we've been practicing and that infrastructure has been built. So I kind of think, in a way, gaming is a great way to bootstrap and keep Bitcoin alive, to give it an ecosystem in the first world, because otherwise, if we didn't do gaming, people maybe wouldn't have much of a reason to use Bitcoin every day apart from just hodling, right? And then people might forget how to use it. They might forget to turn the node on, all these kind of things. And then when they really need to use it, they'll be rusty, as it were. So that's kind of another thought I had. It's just a great way to onboard people. It's a great way to keep you kind of nimble with Bitcoin. That makes sense.
Yeah, so people have to learn how to use Lightning, for example. They're going to have to learn a little bit around, okay, how do I manage my channels? Yeah. How do I refill and refund the channels? Little things like that.
Yeah, that's what kind of games, in a way, why I guess animals and humans play games in a way. It's training in a way, but it's a fun way to train. So I think, a similar argument could be made with Bitcoin and gaming.
Yeah, potentially, yeah. And I think, so I guess let's get into what we think could be enabled then with Lightning that was not possible before.
Yeah, I guess my first answer there is I like to say I don't know because I want just something completely that we haven't thought of or we can't think of yet will appear in a few years. So I'm sure there are these hidden gems out there that in a few years, once we've built some first prototype games, somebody go, oh, hang on a minute, this is a really cool idea. But at the moment, I think the two things I'm quite interested in, one is just streaming payments between players, like non-custodially. And working on a game at Zebedee that does that, like a Street Fighter style game, whereas people punch each other. Basically, a punch is like a Satoshi or 10 Satoshis, whatever they set. And, if player one punches player two, then player two gets a Satoshi from player one completely non-custodially, and vice versa. So I think that's really cool. Another thing which kind of came about from the Lightning conference itself was the idea of audience participation, and kind of the idea that you can, because I think esports and people watching other people playing games is quite popular now.
Yeah.
You get people just go online on Twitch and just watch people play games. It's like watching football on TV. And I kind of think obviously people like to cheer, but people want to kind of interact with the player. So at the Lightning conference, we quickly put together this demo that when two people were playing, the other people were watching, and they could actually stream. They could send sats to the players to give them like a boost of health, or to give them a power up, or they can kind of interact and help them out. I think that's quite cool that you can kind of like break kind of the fourth wall or whatever wall.
Yeah, break that barrier a bit. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah. So that's something I'm quite interested in.
Yeah, so I guess tell us a little bit about that game as well, how that game came together.
Yeah. It's actually the game itself. It was last year. Last year? No, this year. Anyway, it was about a year ago. I think there was a Lightning hackathon. There was a virtual Lightning hackathon last year. Yeah, it was last year. And no, sorry, there was a hackathon in New York. I wanted to attend it, but I couldn't. But I just thought, why don't I just do the hackathon at home and just try and keep the same hours and just it wasn't a virtual hackathon, but I thought, whilst they're doing it, I've got a free weekend. I had this idea before, this idea of building like a Street Fighter type game. So yeah, I'll just try and make it over the weekend. And I made a demo and kind of got that working. It was a bit clunky. And then there was the Lightning Hackathon for Bitcoin 2019, where I kind of got the old code out and I kind of completed that game. I also built a couple of other games. I made 3 games for the Lightning Hackathon there. And I was lucky enough to win that. And the game got a little bit better. And then from winning the Lightning Hackathon, it kind of got me potential to start and join Zebedee. And now we've got the chance and the funding to develop the game to like a fully production level. But yeah, I don't know. I think it seemed like quite a simple, basic concept. I thought it was a good way to demonstrate Lightning. It's quite easy to explain. I punch you, you get a stat. You punch me, whatever. So that was kind of how it came about.
Yeah, that's awesome. Tell us a little bit actually how Zebedee came together and some of the concepts around that.
Yeah, well, actually, Zebedee was actually kind of it was started by my co-founder Simon, and I think he had this idea of he wanted to do, like, he thought that Lightning and gaming made sense. I don't want to put words into his mouth, but yeah, this is the impression I got. And he would he's not a developer himself, so he just wanted to find a couple of developers that could help him realize. At the time, I was actually working for a Japanese company building something quite similar, but for various reasons, that company didn't work out, and I was kind of free. And just as that company didn't work out, I got contacted by Simon, who just basically said, hey, he didn't know that I was doing it, but that thing that you were doing, do you want to continue it? It kind of sounded like to me, and you can come on board as a co-founder. So he contacted me, and I said, yeah, I'm cool. I'm on board with this. he had also contacted Andre Nevis, who's a great guy, and you should definitely try and get him on the podcast. And I kind of knew Andre from Twitter, so he seemed like a cool guy, and I just said, yeah, sure. We were both on board. Simon managed to secure some funding, and that's kind of how it came together. I was quite lucky, and it all happened quite quickly. And now we've started, and we're building cool stuff.
Yeah, right. And so at the Lightning conference, or rather 1 or 2 days just before, Michael Ferguson from the London Bitcoin devs group or organizer, he organized a presentation night where people came and presented. And I saw you guys obviously went up and did your presentation about Zebedee and, okay, here's what we're doing. And you had a couple of different prongs. So it was a bit interesting because it wasn't just, hey, we're just making Lightning games. We're also going to try and make it easier for other people to implement Lightning into their games. Tell us a little bit about some of those ideas you presented.
Yeah, so I guess it's probably important to clarify that Zebedee isn't actually a gaming studio. We want to focus on making the tools and the SDKs for game developers to make games. We are making a game, and actually my sole job at Zebedee is to make the game along with a couple of other people. So we do plan to make a professional game, but we kind of understand that making a game and maintaining a game, you really need to be a dedicated studio to do that. So the idea is that we're going to make kind of these flagship games to basically show what you can do with the SDK and the APIs and what you can do with Lightning. But we really want other gaming studios who are non-Bitcoin, but they really know how to make games and do games well and kind of, get a game to market. And we want them to kind of be flagship games of our tools as well. I guess the main problem we see at the moment is it's quite hard to convince normal game developers to be interested in Bitcoin because most people have only ever heard of Bitcoin. I think most people probably never heard of the Lightning Network. They've heard of Bitcoin. Most gamers have heard of Bitcoin because it made their graphics cards more expensive. Well, not Bitcoin. That was I tell them that was something else. That was Ethereum and stuff. But that's the kind of impression they have. And then their first idea of Bitcoin is, well, in-app purchases work for me. Why would I, want to use Bitcoin? I guess you could say, well, yeah, you could, save 30% that you don't have to send to Apple or Steam. But it's not really enough to try and convince them. But they're not aware of the other cool innovative things that you can do with Bitcoin, such as kind of esports, audience participation, streaming between players, sending the players Bitcoin, as rewards. So the idea is that we are going to build the games that kind of show that, and that's a good example for the other game, the game developers to go, hey, okay, wow, that's pretty cool. I didn't know you could do that. Oh, it would be cool if we could do that in our game. And so that's kind of why we're building the games and the APIs and the SDKs.
Yeah, that's cool. And I think it's also crucial to recognize that these games have to be good enough in their own right. Because if these games are only played amongst Bitcoin and Lightning people, well, that's a very small audience, right? And so I think that's also part of it, that recognition that the game has to be really fun in its own right to sort of draw in non-Bitcoin people who then can learn about Bitcoin in that process.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of, that was kind of a decision on my part when I made the game. I could have called the game Block Wars or Bitcoin Battle or something, which was, but we just kind of want to make a game, that obviously non-Bitcoiners would like, but they could enjoy it, but they could easily see how Bitcoin is used. So I think streaming payments is a little bit complicated at the moment to show newbies. But one thing that we plan to do in the game is that, and this is why I found successful in my original games when I first got into Bitcoin in 2013, 14, was the idea is that people could play the game and they just got Bitcoin for free, which is, a great way, they play a game, then they get this kind of these Bitcoin for free, and there's no risk. Okay, what can I do this Bitcoin now? I can use it in this other game, or I can send it to somebody. It's a great onboarding mechanism. So that's another important feature of the game. But I do have to admit that we kind of understand at the moment, like we don't expect our game to compete with like the AAA game studios. Like we're not going to kind of, we're not going to replace Call of Duty anytime soon. But we just, I think we want to make good games that, that people enjoy and, that can be popular and just they can get the ecosystem rolling and get the attention of, the kind of the smaller studios. And once the smaller studios start to use it, then maybe that gets the attention of the bigger studios. I've actually, in my previous consulting work, I've actually spoken to larger gaming studios when I was in Japan. And I actually demoed Lightning at Tokyo Game Show and I spoke to some people. But like the larger gamer studios, they're not really interested in giving power back to the users at this point of time. They kind of want to control things. And they have legal restrictions and they're quite large, so they're not going to do anything risky. But the smaller, the indie game studios were the ones that were more interested. And I kind of think that's where it probably has to come from.
Right, so it might be more like a way that a challenger brand can differentiate themselves and get new players in to say, hey, look, we've got this new thing that the big players don't want or they don't have a reason to put that in yet, but we do want to.
Yeah, I think that's how technology generally evolves, kind of this, a scrappy startup comes out of nowhere and disrupts the big players. So yeah, I think that makes sense. Obviously, if Nintendo want to add Lightning Network, sure, come to us. We're not going to say no.
Yeah, that's cool. And so then what are your thoughts around platforms? So there are obviously PC games, console games, mobile games. What are you focusing on?
Everything. Well, so the games at the moment are built with Unity is kind of the technology used. It's kind of what 95% of indie game developers use. So we're building it with Unity, and Unity just lets you build to like many platforms. So there's not a lot of work involved to kind of build for different platforms. Obviously, I kind of think mobile is important in this day of age. But obviously mobile can be more restrictive due to Apple's policies. So my kind of view is that we're definitely going to get something working on mobile. It seems that through my past experience, and I've actually spoken to like the app review team a few times, I think like sending Satoshis between players is fine. Obviously, there's going to be some restrictions on countries that you're not allowed to do it, and it's going to be targeted at different age, but that's okay. Sending Bitcoin to players is fine. The only thing you definitely can't do is purchase things with Bitcoin, because obviously that is kind of, it's replacing the App Store or the in-app purchase mechanism. But to be honest, that's not that interesting anyway, I think. It's not something new, so I'm not too fussed about that. Having said that, it's Apple's rules, so Apple can always like change the rules at any time, which is why we're also building for just desktop web as well. I'm quite interested in mobile web. I think that's it's limited at the moment, but it's definitely getting there. And mobile web, you kind of have the advantages of mobile, but with no restrictions. But it's, I think, surprise, surprise, Apple on their Safari mobile browser kind of accidentally make mobile web games difficult to run. I'm not sure if they do that on purpose, but it's interesting. I think we just we want to target as many platforms as possible. But yeah, mobile I think is a good way to reach the most people in this day and age.
Right. And what about on the Google Play side? Are they restrictive there as well, similarly with the Apple side?
Less restrictive than Apple. In a way, Apple generally, they manually review your apps as you submit them. So you actually get a guy in a room who looks at them. So you kind of know when you first submit it, if it's going to be rejected or not. Google, I'm not sure, but it seems to be an automated review. And what you find with Google is that, your game will just be taken down like a month later. But in my experience, Google are a lot less strict. But the good thing about Android is you don't have to go through, the Google Play Store. You can go through like F-Droid or other options. But with Apple, you kind of, there's no other easy way for a person to install an app that Apple haven't approved, unfortunately. But I don't know. I kind of think, it's like, again, Bitcoin wallets were banned on Apple at the time, but eventually they seem to tend to come around. They're a bit slow, but I think Apple just wants to do a lot of due diligence, and just, their knee-jerk reaction is just to ban these games and these apps. and then once they've looked into it, they tend to add them back. I had this issue a lot with Apple in the early days. It was quite funny, I remember actually speaking to the app review team. They banned one of my apps, and she was explaining, and she was saying, well, because she wasn't didn't know anything about Bitcoin or blockchain, but she was reading from a sheet. So the approved currencies we're allowed to approve are the Litecoin, Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the DAO token. I was like, yeah. Well, at one point, the DAO token was an Apple approved virtual currency, and then I think a few days later, the DAO hack happened. So yeah, Apple are over the place. To be honest. It's funny.
So I guess the other big one then, from maybe from the App Store or maybe from a legal perspective, is all this kind of money transmission laws stuff. Do you see much of a burden or hurdle there?
Sure. It's, again, at the moment, everything's a gray zone, right? I think, again, at the moment, it seems to be, if it's player to player, non-custodial makes things a lot easier. So actually, there's an incentive. It's quite interesting. So we were talking about this in our last team meetup. Actually, there's a strong incentive for us to be non-custodial, which is actually good for the ecosystem, because I think a lot of companies, if it was less strict about people being custodial, you get a lot more people doing custodial services, because in a way it's easier, especially with Lightning. It makes things a lot easier to be custodial. But in a way, we don't want to be custodial because of the the regulation. So in a way, it's forcing us to be more non-custodial. Having said that, we actually will have a custodial kind of onboarding mechanism, just to kind of help, because obviously we want to onboard people to Lightning, and obviously at the moment it's hard to kind of do that in a complete non-custodial way. So we do have a small custodial onboarding mechanism, but that's going to be limited, to very small amounts and things like this. But so just as it goes to money transmitter license, as long as you're not touching fiat and you kind of non-custodial, it seems to be okay. Yeah. But having said that, it is a gray area, so things can change.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And I'd love to hear a bit more about how you're going to configure that part of it in terms of custodial versus non-custodial. So obviously, I guess the easy way at the start is, if that user doesn't know about Bitcoin, they've just got a custodial amount just for a small amount, then how would they progress and how would they configure it to be non-custodial?
Yeah. So again, we are still kind of working out the details. So we're actually building the platform now. But I guess the simplest idea is that a user will download the game, and they'll download our wallet, and they can just get some sats. As they play the game, they can just get some sats free. And obviously that's going to be custodial. It's going to be a small amount. And then we're going to have a voucher system, where players or people, or we can give players a small amount of sats through a voucher system. At the moment, what we're planning to do to incentivize kind of the non-custodial route is we want to work. So another thing I should make clear, we're building a wallet for our games, but again, we don't necessarily want to be the only wallet company that supports this. We have to build this wallet at first, just so we can build the protocols for streaming sats between players and all the cool things we want to do. But we're actually working with a few other wallets and want to work with some of the bigger wallets to kind of we'd love them to do that more than us. So I think there are a few wallets out there, like Breeze, for example, is a great kind of non-custodial that seems to make kind of onboarding pretty easy. They kind of open a nice channel to you, and you don't have to worry about liquidity. So I kind of think as the Lightning network evolves, I think the wallet companies are going to solve this kind of onboarding issue. Basically make it easy for non-Bitcoin savvy newbies to be able to use a non-custodial Lightning wallet and not have to worry about streaming. And then once they've got Satoshis in a custodial fashion, we can do some cool things with with swaps and stuff, and Lightning loops where we can transfer their balance. Another thing is I don't go into too much detail, but The idea that you can charge higher fees, for say custodial, where non-custodial you can lower the fees, so you're kind of incentivizing people to move to non-custodial. Another thing is you have like limits, so if somebody wants to put I don't know, $50 or something, then they've got to like go to like non-custodial mode or something. But if they just want to get into it and just get a few like dollars, I think it's fine to be custodial, and then if they want to get lower fees and larger amounts, and we're going to give them an easy on ramp to use the non-custodial wallet. So that's kind of what we're thinking at the moment. Obviously, we're building this out, so we're going to work out the details. But it seems to be. I think it's getting better, and I think it's a quite solvable problem.
Awesome. And
like I said,
yeah, go on.
We don't want to be custodial because it causes more work for us. We have to obviously worry about the legal, and the regulatory aspects. So
yeah, it sounds like there's pros and cons, I guess. So it might be technologically more difficult to build non-custodial, but from a legal and regulatory point of view, it's better. So
yeah. I prefer the technical challenge more than the legal challenge. I can say that.
Nice, well said. And one other question around streaming versus batching for payments, and even on Lightning, for example, rather than like sometimes when you want to route a payment on Lightning, that might still take 10 seconds or a bit more. What's your view there? Is it something like at the end of each round you would do a payment, or during the fight or during the gameplay that you would literally be streaming payments?
Yeah, I think the main thing so you can stream payments, and if they're small amounts, you can kind of have what's the word I'm looking for here? In the UI of the game, you can kind of show the payments are streaming, and you can kind of show in the UI that it is streamed, even if it hasn't confirmed. And then just assuming that it will confirm in a second. If it doesn't, you update it. I think this is what Twitter does with its likes. So if you see like Twitter, you have all these likes going up. Twitter can't actually know how many likes are actually doing it in real time. So I think Twitter has this algorithm where it kind of shows likes, but a second later, it kind of updates it to the real amount. So it might go lower, but you don't really see it. The UI just kind of shows likes going. So that's kind of one way to show it on the UI point of view. It'll look like it's streaming. So, in the game, it'll just say, you've got a Satoshi. But really, you've got a Satoshi. It's not a big deal, right? They can still play the game, and, it's small amounts, so you don't have to necessarily worry about it being confirmed as you hit. So I think it's acceptable. Another thing is that we are, as part of our API and tools, we're going to have this kind of connectivity module, if that makes sense. The idea that we're going to make sure that our players are well connected to other players, and developers that use our APIs and SDKs, they're also well connected to us and the other players. So that way, there shouldn't be too many hops. And when you're streaming, the amounts are quite low that you don't really need to do that many hops. If you're streaming like a few Satoshis, generally you find it routes pretty easy.
Right.
Yeah. So I think in practice it's not a bigger problem. So the idea that like we're gonna have like as a game studio, we're gonna have make sure our node is connected to the popular wallets, and make sure that game developers who use our software and so our software will let them link their own node, and it'll also work with BTC Pay as well. So a game developer can link their BTC Pay to our API and SDK, and we'll kind of make sure, hey, let's open a channel together, so to make sure that your players are linked to us. So streaming should be quite smooth and fast and easy. So that's kind of how we're approaching it at the moment.
Yeah, that's awesome. So it's sort of like these relationships, if you will, it makes sense for there to obviously have channels between these two parties, right? Like with you and Breeze or Zap or these other big providers.
Sure. Yeah. And you kind of see that happening already. There's incentives for everybody to be well connected, just because as a merchant or a game developer, you want to give your players good kind of a good experience. So that one of the simplest things that you can do is make sure you've got a few channels open to the larger wallets, and that also kind of helps kind of make this net mesh of nodes that kind of decentralizes it a bit more. So I think all the incentives are in place just to kind of solve this problem.
Yep. And what about finding developers for the cause and teammates, right? So you've got the three co-founders. How's the team expanded, and are they also Bitcoiners, or are they just developers who then learn about Bitcoin?
Yeah, so we've got a few new hires, more than a couple. So we've got a designer, we've got a couple of developers, and another developer coming on shortly. To be honest, because it's Lightning, and Lightning is kind of like the hot girl in the room. We've had, it's not too hard to kind of find. Like, we've had developers say, hey, I was on this amount before, but I'm willing to work for this amount just to work on Lightning. So I think obviously there's a shortage of developers. You can't just go on like LinkedIn and whatever, find Lightning people. But I think myself and Andre and Simon, the other two co-founders, we kind of know the good people in the space. So we've reached out to people that we know are good, and people have reached out to us, and people are quite excited to be on board. And so at the moment it's okay. I think obviously we're still a startup, so we're kind of being lean. So we don't, we're not looking for like 20 developers. I think as we grow, if we want to have 10 or 20, 30 developers, that way it'll become more challenging, I think, to find people. But at the moment, I think to be honest, a lot of Bitcoiners have been waiting for it to, because there's not a lot of money in being a Bitcoin maximalist if you're looking for work. I think a lot of Bitcoin developers will tell you this. They've had to, if they've wanted to work on Bitcoin, but the only jobs they've got on are on like other coins, for example. And now I think and I think Bitcoin, in a way, like the only job you could really have was an exchange, because Bitcoin wasn't an application layer. But now with Lightning, you've got these companies who are building applications and attempting to build services and startups. So I think now there's going to be a wave of Lightning based companies who are just going to be sweeping up these Bitcoin developers who've been long waiting for some paid Bitcoin work.
Yeah, although I think it's great to see the ecosystem starting to build and grow. Let's talk a little bit about Lightning in general. So what are some of your favorite tools? What's your favorite implementation? What do you normally use?
Yeah, I don't really have a favorite implementation per se. I think I actually started with C Lightning when it first came out, and I actually moved to LND because at the time LND had a better API. C Lightning API was still a bit kind of, at the time it was sparse, but I heard it's much better now. So I moved to LND, and because I started working with LND, I just basically, that's what I know. So that's kind of what I work with at the moment. But the other implementations also seem great. I'm quite interested in like Rust Lightning per se, but LND is quite good at the moment. It's quite easy to kind of, to read the documentation. They've got a great Slack group, and, if you've ever got an issue, you can go in there and like somebody will help you within minutes sometime. So yeah, I quite like to use LND. Is kind of my main stack. I guess wallets. Wallets. I guess I generally use the one I made myself, to be honest.
So with the wallets, you previously did Pebble Wallet, right? And then I think there was also Nayuta Wallet. Tell us a little bit about your experiences there.
Okay, so this is when I worked for a company in Japan that, like I said, I was trying to build Lightning gaming at that company, and the company itself was actually more interested in tokens and stuff and other things, which is why I kind of didn't work out. But I started to build a wallet, and I started to build games like similar games, but Lightning games on that, and that kind of didn't work out. But I built the wallet, and I got it out there, and people were using it. They liked it. I think it was at the time it was the only wallet that linked with BTC Pay Server, on Android or something like that. So it was quite. I kind of built it for myself as well, because I wanted a wallet that could connect to my BTC Pay Server on Android. So I built that. So I built, and that was called Pebble, and that was actually open source. And then because it didn't work out with the company, I actually do some consulting work for Nayuta as well, which are a Japanese company who made a Lightning implementation, Ptarmigan, and they wanted a wallet. So at the moment, I'm kind of consulting with them to work on it. So Nayuta wallet. It's changed quite a lot, but it was originally based on Pebble. And Nayuta wallet's actually pretty cool. And I think they're actually coming out with an announcement this week, or I'm not sure when this podcast comes out, but it's actually the first mobile Lightning wallet that has a fully validating node in there as well.
Right.
Which so you can actually, it's it's still experimental, but it works. But it's kind of like the HTC
that Exodus blockchain phone thing.
Exodus, yes, but it's only Bitcoin, and it has a Lightning wallet in that links to your LND. So in a way, it's it doesn't have like their secure hardware, but it uses your iPhones it uses your Android's secure kind of enclave. So yeah, it's pretty cool. You can basically run a fully validating Lightning node on your phone, and it also has this hybrid mode. That the idea is that obviously running a full node all the time can be it can be quite heavy on your phone. So it has this hybrid mode where when you start to use it, it'll use Neutrino, and the full node will sync in the background when you're at home and charging. So when you go home, you plug your phone in and you're on Wi-Fi, then the full node will start to run, it'll start to sync, and it will actually kind of do some checks on the blocks that the Neutrino has downloaded, and just to make sure they are actually valid. So it's kind of got like this lazy detective mode. It's still experimental, but I think a lot of the work was done by the AB core team, so it was built on top of that. But that's kind of my favorite wallet at the moment, because I've got this full node, the fully validating node, I should say. It's not a full node because it doesn't have a full. It's a prune node really. So, but yeah, I think that's quite powerful, and yeah, we kind of I think they're open sourcing that as well, so other wallets will be able to implement that as well. So that's kind of my favorite thing at the moment. I feel quite empowered. I've got this whole thing in my pocket,
Yeah, that's really cool, because there are obviously different styles of wallet in the Lightning Network, right? You've got those that are a Lightning node on the phone, but then they might not be as good with routing, say, because they might not be as easy, or you might have different channels, and then it's a bit of an awkward experience because you might have your LND back home with your proper channels, and then you might have to have a mobile, right? And then the other approach we're seeing is the remote control your node back home approach, right? Sure. And then what you're talking about here is actually the full node is on the phone and it's just on.
Yeah. Well, the way I see it, actually, personally, I quite like the approach of everybody just has this box you plug in at home. It's like a router that's you plug it in and forget about it, and everybody links to that. I kind of like that approach. But what's actually cool about the full node that Nayuta have built with the Lightning node, it's actually, I think it can make a lot more sense that if you don't think about it, that you're running a full Bitcoin and Lightning node on your phone, you're running it on Android, which that basically means that if anybody's got an Android TV or an Android box or just cheap Android hardware, you can basically you can basically install or run a full node as an app. So I think it just kind of makes the barrier to, literally you just download an Android app and then this thing starts syncing. So you could kind of have that at home. You can get this I actually did it as a test. I don't recommend it, but I bought a $40 Amazon Fire Stick, and I wanted to see would Nayuta wallet run on that, because that's $40. It didn't have too much RAM, but I think it had just enough. So I plugged that into my phone, I installed it, and yeah, I just literally had a full node running on this $40 stick, Yeah. The only reason I don't recommend it is because I think the type of memory they use, if you kind of hit the database too much, it could burn out their memory. But the point is that I think it's research in the right direction of just making it easier to run a full node. And if you can get one running on Android, and these cheap Android devices come out. Another thing is that you might not need to use the full node on your phone, but say you're traveling, or something happens to your house, you still got a valid UTXO state that you have validated on your phone, in your pocket. So and you didn't have to do any extra work to do that. It's just a thing that ran in the background. So I think it's all stuff in the right direction. I'm not saying that it's the most practical thing, but I think it just makes sense in just improving or making it easier to run a full node. And I think every bit of research in that direction is important.
Yeah. And what about battery usage then? So what's your view there around, if we're running this node on our mobile and the battery burn down and bandwidth usage, is that manageable in your view?
Well, so that's why I say it's hybrid mode. So what you can do is you can set it to only start syncing when you're charging at home and on Wi-Fi. So that was the idea behind it. Obviously, yeah, if it's I have it. So actually, on my phone, I have kind of a flagship Android phone, and I actually just set it to try and sync all the time, if I'm on battery or not. And actually, for me, it's not a big issue. When I'm going out day to day, and I'm not traveling, I'm just going out to the store or whatever, and it's fine. When I was traveling, I did have to turn it off because obviously in between airports and things, I might not have battery, but it wasn't too big of an issue. So yeah, but that was the idea behind the hybrid mode, is that you can kind of, and actually to be fair, so the Android OS at the moment will actually, if it thinks you're using too much battery, it may turn it off itself. So I think Android also has some mechanisms around it. Yeah.
So that's actually one thing as well, because Android is getting more aggressive about shutting down background applications as well. So that's something that Bitcoin or Lightning developers will have to consider that as well.
Yeah. So that's kind of, I think that's what the AB core team also ran into, and when we were working on it with Nayuta, the same issue. I think they updated Android, which basically meant background worked a bit differently. Before, you could basically say run in background and it would do it. Now you basically have to go to the OS and say, please run this in background when you think it's applicable. And on my phone, it kind of runs 80% of the day. So, but my phone's got plenty of RAM. So I think if you're on a decent phone, and phones are getting cheaper, I think you can get a really kind of powerful Android phone for not too expensive nowadays. But it's not. I found it's not too big of an issue. And to the credit of the Bitcoin Core devs, they've done a lot of work. That Bitcoin Core isn't really that heavy,
Yeah, it's
compared
coming down
to
now.
other things. So,
yeah. And from a Lightning point of view, what else are you looking at? One example that comes to my mind is LNURL, which is a really easy way to withdraw as well. So do you want to just talk a bit about that and if you see applications there?
Definitely, that's something we're definitely adding into the game and adding into our...
Sorry, would you mind actually, just for the listeners who don't know, can you just explain what that is?
Oh, yeah. So, okay. LNURL. It's basically a protocol that... actually, there's a few things in the protocol that it can do. But it's just... I would explain it as a way... LNURL is a protocol that just lets wallets and applications talk and communicate a bit more in depth. So before, the only way an application and a wallet could talk was basically you would scan an invoice that the application made on Lightning, and that's all you. Basically, the only thing you could do was pay an invoice. But as people made applications, they wanted to do stuff like they wanted, an application to say open a channel to the user's wallet, or they wanted to request an invoice from the wallet that the application paid, and there was no mechanism to make that. I actually, with another Japanese company, we actually built something before LNURL with a project called Denryu, which we did something similar, but LNURL has become the standard. It's just kind of, just the protocol for applications to talk to wallets. So one of the aspects that we're quite interested in for gaming is the idea that if you want the game to send your wallet a tip or some Bitcoin, the game can basically request the wallet to make an invoice, and then the wallet will send the invoice to the game, and the game can pay it, and in such a smooth way that the user doesn't have to do anything. They just press a button, give me a tip, and the protocol handles it.
Yeah, I might just explain that. So one example there might be right now, if you wanted to withdraw from some service without LNURL, it might ask you, hey, go and generate an invoice, paste it in, right? Yeah. Whereas now with the use of LNURL, they can just show a QR, your wallet, you pull it out and you scan that, and then it will do a withdraw that way. Not just you paying, but you can now withdraw using LNURL in a smooth way, right?
Even smoother than that. So what we want to do is literally, if you have your wallet and a game on the phone, you press button in on the game, and it basically just kind of does it all behind, right? You don't have to actually scan anything. So yeah, but as you said, Stefan, for like web applications, you can just scan it and it'll send you a tip. So it just makes that a bit easier. It's also, I think the protocol has room for growth. So actually we're proposing, we're going to propose some protocols to allow like streaming between players, non-custodial. We want to try and get that into LN URL so other wallets can implement it as well, and other game developers and game SDKs can implement it as well. So it's just, it's a really cool protocol just to add new features to Lightning.
Yeah. Anything else in Lightning that you're excited for in the, let's say, short to medium term?
Oh, it's so much, It's like, the thing, like from a technical point of view, I'm quite interested in it. It's people say it's a lot, but L2 and if seek hash no input gets added, I think won't necessarily affect us too much from a gaming point of view, but I just think it's going to make the Lightning software a bit safer and a bit more economical. I'm quite interested in stuff like channel factories. I spoke to Roast Beef from Lightning Labs, and he's quite hyped about channel factories in gaming, and there's a lot of cool stuff that you could do. It just basically would make like streaming between players even more efficient and cheaper. And you could also, Roast Beef was explaining a lot of stuff to me that went over my head sometimes as it happens. But I think channel factories are going to be pretty important for gaming, because you could have this, a channel factory. Like if you think of like an MMO, and in MMO you have guilds and clans where players get together. Like the clan could open a channel factory together, and everybody in the guild could control like this channel factory. So there's definitely some cool stuff with that. To be honest, I'm quite into. It sounds a bit kind of arrogant, but the most thing I'm interested in is like getting my games out there and like adding streaming and doing the esports. We're actually going to hold an esports event at Advancing Bitcoin in London. It's going to be, I think it'll be the first Lightning esports event where we're going to have two, known Bitcoiners that are going to battle each other in the game. So we're going to make their characters in the game, so they'll fight each other, and the audience can like stream them sats to like give them power ups.
Oh, that's
like
awesome.
Mario Kart. So power ups, some could help them, some could add health, and some could like hurt them. There could be some wild cards there. So that's what we're building. That's going to be exciting. And we're also we're going to have a workshop at Advancing Bitcoin as well. We really want to get other game developers out there and like get them using Lightning. So we're going to run a workshop. So those are the kind of the things I'm quite looking forward to.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm actually going to be at Advancing Bitcoin, so I'll definitely see you there, and I'll definitely try and get to those events.
Battling somebody.
Yeah, sure. Okay, cool. So look, I think we're just about coming to time, but maybe just let the listeners know, are you looking for any, what can they do if they want to follow Zebedee? Are you hiring? Who do you want to hear from? Anything like that?
Yeah, well, I think the simplest thing is to go to just to follow us on Twitter, and I'm sure it'll be in the show notes, probably be a link there. And you can also visit our website at zebedee.io. And the best thing to do is to subscribe to our mailing list, and that'll keep people up to date. At the moment, we're actually building out the tools. So I think the first thing, like the first major release we plan to do will be around Advancing Bitcoin. And then the main thing we're looking for at the moment is actually other games, like indie developers. You don't have to be a big studio or a small studio. You could just be an individual. We just want to get, we'd like to talk to developers who are interested in using our APIs and SDK. So we'd like to work with them and help them, add Lightning to the game. So if anybody wants to reach out to us, just send us a message on Twitter or email us from the link on our website. We'd love to talk to you.
Fantastic. Well, look, I think it's really exciting. I'm really excited to see where this all goes. So thanks for joining me, Chris.
2020 is going to be crazy.
Hope you enjoy the show, guys. My website has the show notes and transcript. Go to stefanlivera.com. This is episode 132. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the Citadels.